What are the best cantrips in Pathfinder 2nd edition? Which ones are they? And are these cantrips cantrips? Because you can't go wrong with them? And they don't trip you up and stuff because they're rubbish? No, let me do that one over. No, don't start the intro. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to go over what I believe are the best cantrips in Pathfinder 2e. This is indeed a top 10 list, though these cantrips will be listed in no particular order as ever. I'll first go over what cantrips are, then we'll jump into my top 10 with an honourable mentions at the end for cantrips that didn't quite make my list. This list will not include special cantrips such as focus cantrips or the psychics cantrips. It's just the basic cantrips that all the spellcasters get access to. I'll be trying to pick cantrips from each and every spellcasting tradition, and I'm not just going to be picking ones that do the most damage, though there will be some of those in here as well. This particular video chapter is to help out newer players when they come looking through the daunting list of cantrips available to them at level 1, but still, some of these cantrips may actually have one or two uses that even experienced players have not considered. But whether you're new or experienced, thank you for checking out the video, and if you find it helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing or joining or looking at my Patreon, etc. I always appreciate the support. But it's music time, let the melody flow. Rightio, I don't think I need to spend a good deal of time explaining what cantrips are, but just in case, they're basically reusable spells that spellcasters gain access to at level 1. And even some ancestries can gain access to some from as early as level 1, so definitely keep that in mind. In PF2e, cantrips heighten quite regularly, and so they stay relatively powerful as you increase in level. And considering they're infinitely reusable, they're honestly pretty useful indeed, though for the record, by the time you get to the high levels, you have so many spell slots that you're probably not going to use cantrips quite as much. Well, not including classes like the Magus and Summoner, etc. Still, some are going to be useful from level 1 all the way to level 20, but others perhaps not as useful. Hopefully that's enough of an explanation as to what cantrips are, so let's jump into the list itself. If you know anything about PF2e, then you know that this one was going to come in here fast and easy. Electric Arc is 2 actions, targets 2 enemies within 30 feet of yourself, has a basic reflex save, and deals 2d4 damage. It heightens every spell rank, dealing an extra 1d4 each time. One of the reasons this spell is so popular is because it's a save spell, meaning that it doesn't have the attack trait. This means that it doesn't suffer the multiple attack penalty, or MAP, and when you realize that you can hit an enemy with a weapon and then cast this spell and potentially hit 2 more without a penalty all in one turn, you start to realize why Electric Arc is so popular. But really, just the fact that it can hit 2 enemies for 2d4 damage with a range of 30 feet already makes it a great cantrip. And electricity damage is not the most common resistance and immunity for creatures to have. I'm looking at you, Fire. It's not the most uncommon, screw you, Force and Sonic. But still, just make sure the enemy you're targeting isn't immune to electricity or has a high reflex save, or you might be wasting your actions here. Though it is a basic reflex save, so at least on a success it's going to take half damage, so still better than nothing. If you're looking for a decently damaging spell that hits more than one enemy that doesn't suffer from MAP, absolutely consider grabbing Electric Arc. There's a reason so many spellcasters take this cantrip. Next up, Guidance is probably the most retconned cantrip ever used in any TTRPG in the universe, in that so many spellcasters say, oh, actually, I would have cast Guidance before doing that skill action. And whenever players do this at my table, I secretly take a hero point from them. I don't really, the filthy cheaters. So Guidance is 1 action, targets 1 creature within 30 feet, it lasts until the start of your next turn, and it gives them a +1 status bonus to attack roll, perception check, saving throw, or skill check. And once the spell ends, they're temporarily immune to Guidance for 1 hour. And it doesn't heighten because it's already strong enough and doesn't need to be better. Fight me. As ever in PF2e, every +1 matters. Really though, that +1 in a lot of systems is not going to mean a great deal, but because of the 4 degrees of success here in PF2e, it's everything. That 1 hour cooldown can be pretty grim, and if you're not using virtual tabletops, can be a bit of a nightmare to track. But honestly, Guidance is just generally seen as one of the best cantrips in the entire system. This is both because of the +1 and the fact that it applies to things like attack rolls. One of the things that I always talk about in PF2e is combining abilities, so you can cast Guidance on someone and then aid them for a second action plus a reaction to give them even higher bonuses. That's because Guidance is a status bonus and aid is a circumstance bonus. And with it being 1 action, that effectively means you could give 3 party members a +1 to the next attack roll or skill check. That's pretty cool. The only downside really is that it doesn't stack with Courageous Anthem or Bless, as they're both status bonuses. And of course, keep an eye out for that 1 hour cooldown. Anyway, next cantrip. This is one of those damaging cantrips that's kind of underappreciated. Telekinetic Projectile is 2 actions with a range of 30 feet, targets 1 creature for 2d6 bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, and it's a spell attack roll. And it heightens every spell rank by 1d6 damage. So usually, spell attack rolls are the worst thing in the universe for any spellcasters in PF2E, worse than rolling a d1 on a 1-action heal spell. Seriously, this happens way too often for me. The reason for this is because targeting AC with spells is usually harder than targeting saves, and of course it does introduce the multiple attack penalty, which nobody likes, not even Zonku Thon, and he's into some real messed up shit. But the best part for me, and probably the reason why I say it's underappreciated, is the fact that you get to choose the damage type. Obviously this is going to be down to GM discretion, but at my tables I'd be fine with players using rocks or whatever they could find on the ground, and they could even say this one looks pointed, so I'm going to use it as a piercing projectile. So if you have a GM that's as awesome, amazing, and modest as I am, plus I'm really handsome and stuff, fight me again, then this cantrip can be very powerful in the right hands against certain enemies. I mentioned in my top weapons trait video about how being able to use different damage types is very underrated in this system, and it's a very powerful thing, and this cantrip is no exception here. Being able to target certain weaknesses, or basically bypassing certain resistances, is honestly potentially going to really help you out in a very challenging encounter. Just bear in mind that no specific traits or magic properties of the held item affect the actual projectile, so unfortunately telekinetically lobbing that alchemist fire is not going to do a great deal outside of the normal damage listed. Still, do not sleep on Telekinetic Projectile, it's very powerful in the right circumstances. Alright, our next cantrip is... What's better than being able to shield yourself without having a free hand? Okay, well, like immortality and infinite money, but anyway, being realistic, shield is a 1-action spell that can only be cast on yourself that gives you a +1 circumstance bonus to AC and lasts until the start of your next turn. While the spell's in effect, you can use the shield block reaction even if you don't have that specific action unlocked. On top of that, unlike a shield, you can actually block magic damage. This magic shield has a hardness of 5, and that hardness heightens every 2 spell ranks by 5. Once you've used this particular shield block, the spell ends and you cannot cast it again for 10 minutes, which would be its biggest disadvantage. So the +1 to AC is decent, but it's not amazing. Generally though, increasing your AC even by 1 is more about crit avoidance than it is hit avoidance. So the 1 AC is fine, but really, as I've already mentioned, the reason this cantrip is so good is because it gives you the shield block reaction and you don't need a free hand to do it. So even if you're wielding a 2-handed weapon, you could grab the shield spell from maybe one of your ancestry feats or something, and boom, you now have access to the shield cantrip and you can actually shield block as a reaction. And considering it auto heightens regardless of whatever class you choose, seriously, it's a pretty good cantrip to take. It's definitely one of those cantrips that's amazing in clutch situations like when you get crit or something. So if you're going to be using 2-handers or you're going to be in melee range when spellcasting, you're going to want to use this spell for one of your actions. Trust me. Okay, moving on. This cantrip is a Magus's best friend, and that makes sense because all Maguses ever do is cast Sure Strike and then Gouging Claw, and everyone rolls their eyes when they get a crit. Ugh. A Gouging Claw is a melee range 2-action cantrip that targets 1 creature's AC. On a hit, it deals 2d6 slashing or piercing damage plus 2 persistent bleed damage. It heightens every spell rank by 1d6 and the persistent damage goes up by 1 also. The biggest downside to this cantrip is the fact that you've got to be in melee range to do it. This isn't going to be a problem for a Magus, as I already mentioned, with Spell Strike, but if you grab the Reach spell feat, you can spend 1 extra action and cast this at a 30-foot range. And you may ask, why do that when I could instead use Telekinetic Projectile? And yeah, that's a fair question, but persistent damage is very powerful in PF2E, especially 2 persistent damage every single turn. They've got to roll that flat DC 15 check to get out of that persistent damage, otherwise they're just going to keep bleeding, and at lower levels, 2 damage per turn is pretty dangerous to be constantly ticking down. That and getting to pick between piercing or slashing damage in itself is quite good. And remember that if you happen to crit, that persistent bleed damage gets doubled also, and that damage can really add up. But being in melee range does have its benefits, such as enemies being pretty easily flanked. So if you're one of those spellcasters that's happy to be in melee range, you're pretty regularly going to be able to get an effective +2 on this spell attack roll due to how off guard works. Pair that with something like guidance and you have a really good chance of critting. So if you're looking to be a spellcaster and deal some pretty significant damage in melee, Gouging Claw is a really good bet. Rolling on to... Detect Magic is one of those cantrips that I tend to forget about quite often because it's one of those passive things that works in the background, but do not dismiss it. Detect Magic is a 2-action cantrip with an emanation of 30 feet, although you probably aren't going to be using this all that much in combat. It's more of an exploration, repeater spell activity. Well, what's good about this is that there's quite a few hazards in PF2E that are magical, and if you're detecting magic, you're going to have a good chance of picking those up before anyone else does. A 30-foot emanation is pretty large, and that means you get a pretty large chance of sensing those traps or haunts before they go off. On top of that, if there's any illusion magic that's a lower rank than your Detect Magic spell, then you're going to pick up on that. And as this spell heightens, it gets rather powerful indeed. At 3rd rank, you learn the rank of the most powerful magical effects that you can detect, and once it gets to 4th rank, you're also able to pinpoint this source of the highest rank magic. It works like an imprecise sense, so you don't know the exact location, but you can narrow it down to within a 5-foot cube. And of course, if there's any magical items nearby, there's a good chance that your Detect Magic ping is going to pick them up. And if you pick up an item and have absolutely no idea what it is, because maybe everyone fails the checks on it, Detect Magic will tell you whether or not it's magical. So it's a good cantrip to have at your fingertips whenever you need it. It really does help exploring dungeons and the like, and it's certainly something that you're going to be happy you took once one of your pings hits something that you may otherwise have missed. Alright, let's keep on going. Needle Darts is a somewhat recently added spell, and it's available to all traditions, which is one of the reasons it's on this list. Needle Darts is a 2-action cantrip with a range of 60 feet that targets one creature's AC. On a hit, it deals 3d4 piercing damage, and on a critical hit, it also adds persistent bleed damage. And if you happen to have some silver or cold iron, etc. on you when you use this spell, those special properties are added to the spell effect. It heightens every spell rank with another 1d4 damage plus another point of bleed damage on a crit. As I already stated, it's available to every tradition, which makes this a decent all-rounder to pick up for anyone looking to just have a 2-action damage-dealing cantrip. The 3d4 damage is pretty decent, but this whole special properties thing can come very much in use when you go against enemies that have weaknesses to certain metal types. And these do not become consumed on use, they come back to you after the attack, so you can use them infinitely. Plus, that 60-foot range is rather far. Getting to deal that much piercing damage from level 1 with a 60-foot range is going to be very helpful in many a scenario, and that's Needle Darts. But let's try a weird cantrip next. This is one of those cantrips with 1 billion uses if you have a relatively well-functioning brain, which sadly I do not, but luckily for me, most of my players do. Figment is a 2-action cantrip with a 30-foot range that can be sustained, and basically you just make an illusory sound or visual. If it's a sound, then it gains the auditory trait, but cannot include words or elaborate music, though it can contain grunts and noises and even like basic music. And if it's visual, it cannot be larger than a 5-foot cube, and when someone comes within 15 feet of it, they know it's fake. As I said, this is one of those cantrips that's very useful in certain situations. For example, you could use it to lure enemies into a trap by putting something valuable in their path, like a pouch of gold or a kitten meowing or something. You could make a fake wall or like a barrel or something to hide behind so long as they don't come within 15 feet of it, and your allies could potentially sneak with it. You could create a fake hole or a lava pit that enemies may spend extra actions trying not to go near. Or you could create a fake wall to put in front of an ally if there's archers shooting at them, and they may miss their attacks because of the fake cover. The only limitations really with this cantrip are your mind, and the fact that it specifically mentions that it needs to be a simple illusion. And of course that comes down to GM bias and whether or not your GM is awesomely cool like me or a total dork, also like me. But overall, there's quite a lot you can do with this particular cantrip, and it's a pretty fun one when you let your imagination go wild. Penultimate cantrip is... Cover sucks, and so does everyone who thinks it's awesome. Take cover is really that powerful. Shut up, me. Phase Bolt is a 2-action cantrip with a range of 30 feet that targets one creature's AC for 3d4 piercing damage, and it heightens every spell rank for another d4 damage. The good thing about this particular cantrip is that it reduces the bonus from shield or cover by up to 2. That may not sound super duper useful because it's not all that often that enemies are in cover or have a shield, but bear in mind that they will have cover if they are behind one of your allies. And how often as a ranged martial or caster do your enemies have cover because your stupid allies are stood right in the way? And how dare they try to protect you and make it harder for you to hit enemies? They're so inconsiderate. For real, it's a very, very regular thing for your allies to be in the way of enemies that you're trying to hit with a ranged ability. And yes, this cantrip effectively removes that entirely. The limit to that is that it only reduces it by up to 2, but it's still pretty rare for enemies to have anything more than that. So yeah, absolutely grab Phase Bolt if you're regularly casting cantrips from the back lines. I can pretty much guarantee it's going to help you on many occasions. Okay, final cantrip is... This cantrip, if it could be used in real life, would forever change everything, and is rather well known. Prestidigitation is a 2-action cantrip with a range of 10 feet that targets one object. With this cantrip, you're able to cool, warm, or flavor an object, slowly lift an unattended object of light bulk 1 foot off the ground. You can use it to make a temporary object of negligible bulk made of congealed and magical substance, which sounds terrifyingly dodgy. And you can use it to tidy things such as color, clean, or soil an object of light bulk or less. Seriously, in real life, this is the cantrip that everyone would want to have. Being able to warm up or flavor food, amazing. Being able to clean or dry your clothes, incredible. And it's 2 actions, so it's literally like 4 seconds. This is another one of those cantrips where it really is up to your GM in some senses on what you can do with it, but it has a lot of potential utility, although most of these are going to be for roleplay flavor only. But that's one of the reasons it's on the list, as not every spell, or cantrip, or ability in this game has to be all about mechanics. Sometimes they can just be about being really cool for roleplay, and I think Prestidigitation is definitely the best one on this list for that. Okay, that's the end of my top 10 cantrips for PF2E. There's so many good cantrips in PF2E that honestly narrowing it down to 10 was incredibly difficult. So let's move on to the honorable mentions. And in no shape or form are these cantrips I'm about to mention actually bad. Honestly, most of them are quite fantastic. And there's still more in the list. Honestly, there's so many good cantrips in this system. Anyway, Telekinetic Hand. This one is also just kind of fun. Telekinesis in general is just really cool, and it's probably more of a roleplay thing, but there are situations where grabbing things within 20 feet of you is pretty good. Like if you're trapped in a prison, it's through prison bars or whatever. And as you heighten the spell, the bulk increases, so you can actually grab relatively hefty things with this one eventually. It's a fun one. Light. This would have been on the list if not for the fact that many ancestries get dark vision, and it's 2 actions, whereas grabbing a torch is technically 1 action. Yeah, you'd have to have a free hand for the torch to work, but still, light is amazing for people who don't have dark vision, but its usefulness kind of vanishes as your party levels, gets those sort of abilities or items that do the same thing. Message. Being able to telepathically speak to someone is just really cool and be helpful in a lot of social situations. Spout. You could use this to kill a lot of fish at once, and there's nothing in the spell that says you cannot use this to make drinking water. PF2E hacks. Timbo. This has a 15-foot line, which is potentially awesome, just a little bit too situational for my tastes. Haunting Him. 15-foot cone is great, but I think Electric Arc is better. Sonic damage does have less resistances though. Rousing Splash, because 1d4 temporary hit points that last a minute is pretty awesome. Approximate. Ha! Just kidding, this one sucks. Okay, I'm all cantripped out. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video chapter helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, joining, checking out my Patreon, etc. And please pop in the comments what your top cantrips are. Honestly, most of the cantrips in PF2E have their uses, and I absolutely guarantee there's going to be a few in there that you would change for different ones. And I would like to hear what those are. And a shout out to my members and archivists, Max Magnus 20019 and Ozzy Smith. Thank you very much for the support. But for now, this is Dominic of the Domininomicon, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.